And I think we'll go ahead and get started with our first presentation then. Chang and Sohn wears a lot of hats here in Berkeley. He's a doctoral student here at the Graduate Theological Union. He's on staff at CTNS, where he does a lot of the stuff for the website for us. He was probably your primary contact with the participants for the conference. So he's been doing a lot for us there. Thank you very much. And he's also been recently working at the Siow lab at the Helen Willis Neuroscience Institute at UC Berkeley. Thank you very much for your time, Cheng-In, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So my presentation will be on the AI as a supporting medium for human virtue and flourishing. So I'm using David Hume's philosophy and neuroscience on this discussion. Those two questions. Number two, can AI assist humans in the acquisition of virtue? And three, is AI itself capable of virtue? If so, are those virtues shared with or distinct from human virtues? And my answer will be, based on David Hume's definition, current AI without embodiment, including human-like sentiment and sympathetic capacity, is the Humean language, is incapable of resembling human capacity and acquiring natural virtue. Instead, AI can be designed to have artificial virtues or traits that assist human virtue acquisition and flourishing based on social agreement and demand. Yeah, I'll dive into my paper. So introduction, there are a lot. So current trend of AI is represented by ChatGPT, or the larger language model. So larger language models are expanding, and then it acts as if those are actual humans. But the problem is the large language model itself capable of virtue? And my answer, based on the Humean language, will be no. So before dive into my argument, I'm going to introduce David Hume's moral philosophy. So the David Hume's sympathy theory, he suggests that there are several stages of the sympathy. So first, when we see others, people, like a person's expression or emotional state, our mind is a retrospective about the cause of the actualized expression of the abstract cognitive signals, and then forms and projects a mental representation of it. And from our own construct of others' emotion, which is the most similar experiences we have or experience as a response to others, we feel the version of others' emotion. This is the definition of human sympathy. It is quite different from what we actually use, the modern use of sympathy, but it is what it is. For Hume, sympathy is a communication, not a direct transmission or emotional contagion of others. And what makes us to sympathize is the structural and compositional similarities. Based on the quote, the minds of all men are similar in their feelings and operations, are like functional, and then structural similarities makes us to communicate and understand one another. And this idea of sympathy is really crucial in the Humean philosophy because it becomes the foundation for the virtues. So sympathy not only allows us to directly experience and understand the perspective of others, but also able to discern and care for others. The purpose of sympathy aims for the good of all human beings. It becomes a ground to establish morality and virtues that aid social bonding and community life. So that's why I'm introducing Humean sympathy first before diving into the virtue. For Hume, sympathy is a very powerful principle of human virtue, which gives rise to many of other virtues. So based on the Humean understanding, so for humans, communicate each other, and then our feelings of approval becomes a basis of the virtues. And based on the Humean understanding, AI does not have those, especially the larger language models, which does not have a human-like moral sentiment and sympathy. in a strict sense, cannot possess natural virtues that arise directly from human nature and emotions. And I'm bringing neurocoupling, the neuroscientific evidence, as another supporting evidence. So based on Yuri Hassan at Princeton department, they examined how two brains synchronize each other by transmission of the signal via communication. In the listener-speaker relationship, both sides mirror each other while creating a shared neural representation of the information being communicated. And it's not only limited to language, but also it involves the other forms of nonverbal, social, and cognitive cues. There are two types of coupling based on Yuri Hassan's paper. He talks about the one is a stimulus to brain coupling, and the second figure talks about the brain to brain coupling. And the second one shows that how two brains each other like synchronize one another while interacting and then exchanging exchanging signals. And this chart shows how the neural coupling happens based on the speaker-listener relationship. So in the bottom chart, see the synchronous region marked as yellow that happens at the same time, and the blue region talks about is sparkling first, like when in amongst the speaker, and the listener follows that region. And on the contrast, the red region, the listener brain sparks first, and then the speaker brains follow. The existence of neural coupling indicates that there is something. So even when we do the conversation one another, our brain actually synchronizes or doing the similar activities in the brain, which may support the neurological evidence on Hume's sympathy theory. And there are several examples of neural coupling mentioned in Yuri Hassan's paper, like cowbird mating, infant learning, and musical improvisation are the examples that can occur, thanks to the neural coupling. So Yuri Hassan's neuroscientific evidence and David Hume's concept of sympathy and autonomous mutual communication present how humans communicate. And natural virtues such as generosity, kindness, benevolence, from the Humean virtue theory, require sympathetic feelings of approval. And AI, especially the current AI represented by the large language model, does not have a human-like moral sentiment and sympathy in a strict sense, thus cannot possess natural virtues that arise directly from human nature and emotions. Therefore, AI without human-like embodiment capacity cannot resemble the neural coupling process via embodied interaction, and thus cannot acquire virtues via interaction in a strict sense. However, I'm not arguing that AI does not have a virtue at all. There are other possibilities from the idea of the Hume's artificial virtues in 19th century figure. So he does not have a exposure to AI. So he didn't intend to use the artificial virtues for AI, but it is artificial because those virtues are formulated based on the social demands and social agreements. For artificial virtues, from the Humean sense, moral qualities that are not natural or instinctive to humans, but rather are established by social convention of the functioning and the well-being of society. And Hume gives the justice as the example. And if we formulate those kind of artificial virtues based on social agreements, what will be the potential candidate? I'm giving some suggestions from several AI ethicists, such as Mark Zuckerberg, Wendell Wallach, and Colin Allen. So Mark Zuckerberg talks about safety as the key virtue that AIs can have, and Wallach and Allen talks about the trait that benefits human users in acquiring good traits. And these are examples. Safety, the Cockerberg talks about the transparency as the safety measure. In transparency in decision-making process and algorithms. And for Wallach, and benefiting human users might be a good trait for artificial virtues, and there are potential possibilities that helps humans to acquire their artificial these are the potential candidates of virtues that AI can have. Still, there are a potential problem of artificial virtues in the Hume solution. He notices about it. If the virtues are the product of social agreement, there should be an issue of proximity and incapability. Like, we are prone to sympathize more with others that are close to us. And some people are incapable of exhibiting sympathy. In this case, when we are formulating artificial virtues based on the social agreements, some like their AI currently led by the white Western and the rich people might neglect some of the necessary components that are necessary for the people of color or the race, gender, etc. Bias and prejudice, and we should consider about bias and prejudice in formulating artificial virtues based on social agreement. And this is the Humean solution. We extending the sympathy, our sympathetic ability to cover as much as we can. I mean, this is like still unsatisfactory for me, but at least I think this is the most practical and the modest way of thinking about formulating the virtues that are necessary for the AI. Thanks so much.
Sorry. Hi, Chang. Thanks a lot for your interesting paper. I am thinking about the connection between neural coupling and transferring of sympathy, the things that Hume talks about on the one hand, and acquiring virtues, possessing virtue, becoming virtuous on the other. I'm thinking about the kind of logical connection between the two. I agree. I think I agree that it's sufficient. I mean, in that sense, having neural coupling, being sympathetic to the other is perhaps sufficient for having virtue, as you said. But I don't know whether it's necessary. That's my question. In that sense, could we have a system, or human being, or any system becoming virtuous without, having to have this kind of neural coupling, or as Hume said, you are looking at another and you see that the other is suffering, and you compare what you see, because Hume always is strictly an empiricist, and you compare what you look in the other person with your own behavior and your own internal feelings, and then you can directly perceive. So that's my question, whether that really is necessary. A motivation for my question is, some people are so attached to their material thing, some people are so attached to their car, for example, and when somebody is scratching their car, they feel, as if their bodies themselves are being scratched. So I wonder what you think about that.
My presentation, because of the time limit, I just I didn't discuss really a lot about the logical connection. So the neural coupling and the neural coupling is necessary because Hume talks about the sympathy is the sympathy makes our moral communication to find the common ground of like feelings of approval. So when we see something good things and we see each other and hey, that's a good thing. And then that in that process, we require some neural coupling. And without those, like the sense of approval, there's no common ground for establishing a like natural virtues such as generosity, kindness, etc. So what I'm saying is that the current language model without those capacities, they can resemble what humans can, but without the embodiment, I'll say they cannot fully resemble our ability to discern others' feelings and then reflect as our own experience and then feeling of the sense of approval. But one step further is that if we are able to create an AI which is intelligence just like us, and also embodied cognition process just as humans, I'll say human can say yes to they are capable of having a natural virtue.
Yeah, thanks.
I hope this answers your question.
DK.
Yes, I really appreciate for your neuroscientific perspective, and it makes our project more diverse and bountiful. Mine is more like questions rather than comments. I have two. And in your paper, page 5, you are saying the brain-to-brain coupling occurs only when the sender and receiver have similar physical structures. And I would like to ask for a specific explanation about that, because do you think of some neurological similarity between the sender and the receiver? And I'm just wondering if there is a kind of brain-to-brain coupling between puppy and human being too, because it seems to me the neurological structure seems very different between the two species, but there is some kind of sympathy going on between the two. And that was my first question. And the second question is with regard to the embodiment. You seem to say that the threshold of going beyond or going to artificial general intelligence is at stake of this embodiment issue. So we all know that certain cases like Boston Dynamics creation of a Spot, a puppet robot, is going to have ChatGPT as a software. So there is going on some kind of software-based AI is going to be embodied in a certain robotic body. So in that case, do you still think those kind of directions also are not going to make this emergence of AGI or something like that?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for your question. For the first question, I don't think in the different species, just such as a puppy, and humans, but human actually, admits there are the capacity of sympathy between different species, and like Hume definitely, Hume gives the example of puppy. Just as you did. We like puppies, even though they cannot understand fully of what is happening, they don't have any higher cognition, just as we are, and so as monkeys or other species, they can still feel our feeling, and then they are capable of synthesize. But it does not mean they have an equivalent ability to synthesize. So that will be the first one, but I cannot provide any neuroscience research going on between species. So, and that's the first one. And second one, for the embodiment and AGI, I was talking about the human level AI, like not the general AGI, because AGI can be rendered without the embodiment, but to have a human level, act like humans and feel like humans, that those require human like embodiment and understanding how the human cognition or the epistemology is critical. The machine from the Boston Dynamics might be they can have AGI in general, but they are not equivalent to humans, right? So I'm talking about I constantly mentioned that my emphasis in my paper is to talk about the human level AI, not the AGI in general. So
Thank you so much for your response. And one question that you didn't address is, by the similar physical structure, you mean the neurological structure or any other?
I'm not limiting the embodiment as the neurological structure. Embodiment is more about like the whole body, the physical structure, not limited to neurological level.
No, I mean the precondition for brain coupling, brain-to-brain coupling.
Yes.
You mentioned that there should be some kind of similar structure needed. So in that case, you're not just saying neurological similarity, rather you are saying some kind of physical structure as a whole.
In Yuri Hassan's paper, is a neurological structure. It's limited to the neurological structure, but I don't think neural activity does not like explain or address everything about the embodiment, but the paper itself is limited to the neurological level. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We probably have time for one more question right now. Jung-hyun?
Yeah. I enjoyed the talk, and the talk makes me think about many things from a new perspective. And my question is about, I think it's related to Taekyung Chang's question, but slightly different. And as I know, AI can have a ability to recognize and discern human emotions, and also they have an ability to express certain emotions in response. And in that case, I just wonder how you interpret these phenomena in AI. AI can recognize and express emotions. Then
yes. So I will say yes. AI have a ability to recognize emotion, and the face recognition. They have a higher like odds of processing facial things compared to humans. They are excelling humans. But the thing is, when we do the neural coupling or the communicate one another, like it is not the one side communication, is a mutual side, which means if AI have can recognize emotion, they have an ability to give another cue, the physical cue, to us, to send it us so that we can process. And still, AI without physical component does not have those give ability to send those kind of cues. And so I will say AI is still kind of limited in that sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chang-in. But for now, we'll move on to our next presentation, which is from Somparn Promta, who's a professor of philosophy, who taught for a number of years in the philosophy department at Chulalongkorn University. And after his retirement, he's now teaching at Chulalongkorn University, and he's also the director of the Center for the Study of Buddhist Philosophy. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My paper is concerned with the question whether or not AI can have virtualized human being. To understand the virtue of AI, The first thing which is required is to understand the virtue of human beings. In my opinion, the happening of human virtue can be understood as the thing which requires some reason. That is, human virtue happens from some necessity. The necessity is that the human life, as naturally given, is not a perfect thing. In the view of Buddhism, human beings are born with the potential to suffer from surrounding conditions of life. Virtue is a tool that would make the mind of a person strong to fight against suffering. From the view of Buddhism, virtue is a property of the human mind. This means that a thing that would have virtue is the thing that has the mind. In this paper, we will call the mind consciousness. From our observation, it can be said that there are three kinds of consciousness found in the human life. The first one is called the ontological consciousness. This kind of consciousness refers to the normal consciousness that happens when we do something with the mind. For example, I am reading a book and thinking about the contents of the book. The consciousness that is happening is the thing that we know what it is. The second kind of consciousness is functional consciousness. I am driving a car. During that time, there are many things happening in my mind. I do not notice that I am driving, but the car is well controlled by me. The consciousness that works behind the driving of the car is called functional consciousness. Our organs, such as the heart, work in such a way that it has intelligence, but they do not allow us to know whether or not they think. The consciousness that works behind this is called the unconscious consciousness. I interpret that the machine might have the third kind of consciousness. When the machine has a kind of consciousness, it is possible for it to have some kind of virtue. The differences between AI virtue and human virtue lie in that the virtue of human beings are based on the ontological and functional consciousness. AI does not have this kind of consciousness. It has only the unconscious consciousness. We can distinguish the virtue to be found in the human life into two parts. The first one is the individual virtue, and the second one is the social virtue. Normally, the virtue for individual is based on the cultivation of the mind. We can say that an individual has some kinds of the moral problem, and this problem needs virtue as the tool to remove it. The social virtue is needed when we live together in the society, and we need some rules to make the society peaceful. AI can be used as a tool for making society peaceful, but AI in itself is not a person who needs individual virtue like a human being. When we talk about the virtue of AI, I think we should question that why we need AI to have virtue. I think the answer to be found in this question might be different from the question concerning the virtue of human being. The human life is born to have the potential to suffer from surrounding conditions, and this problem cannot be solved with science. We need morality to solve this kind of problem. We might not think that AI is created to suffer from surrounding conditions. It does not have the problem like the human being. The Buddha says that When you are angry with other people, the first person to suffer from the anger is yourself. There is some teaching that the Buddha gives to his disciple to stop the anger. AI might not have this kind of problem, so it does not need morality to solve the moral problem in its life. However, there can be some kind of the virtue that AI can have. That is, AI should be applied to serve the society. There is some moral theory which has been designed to serve the society. For example, the utilitarian virtue, the good thing for the community, according to utilitarian virtue, is the thing that would produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It is notable that we can use the empirical way in judging whether or not the thing produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people in the community. In my opinion, AI can be merged into the utilitarian virtue perfectly. We can hope that AI would have the ability to know, understand, and perform the function as the tool to make the peaceful society. The imagination that AI can have virtue other than the utilitarian virtue seems to be the wrong imagination. The difference between AI and human being lies in that AI does not need a thing for personal virtue, while this is extremely needed to make the human life perfect. AI does not have personality, but human beings have. The decision of human beings are sometimes subjective, but AI cannot have the subjective judgment about things in the world. The thing that we can do with AI is to decide it to be the virtual tool that would lead to the fairness, happiness, peacefulness, and so on of the society. The good point in AI is that it can have the objective judgment concerning things in the world. AI has the great power to help human beings judge things in the world without bias. This could be counted as a kind of virtue of AI. When this potentiality of AI has been merged with the fair utilitarian virtue, the reason would happen is that human beings would have the great tool for creating the peaceful society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Rachel.
Hi, thank you so much for your paper. It's really rich. I just have maybe just one small question about a specific part of your paper where you talk about the Turing test. I was really interested in this bit, I think it's on page 12, where you mentioned that it may be that some machines wouldn't pass the Turing test if the person is talking and they have a really high spiritual experience, and the kind of conversation they'd have would be different compared to two people who have spiritual experience talking. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about what is it that you think would be different that the person with the high sort of spiritual experience would notice that's lacking in the machine that it wouldn't pass the test?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think that the basic difference between the machine and human being is that the thinking of human beings sometimes is based on logical and something that look like logical thinking. But beside this thing, when we as human beings think, we think from emotion, and we think from something like artistic emotion, for example. I think the thinking of the machines is based on the logical thinking. It thinks in terms of the quantity, not the quality. And I interpret that the spirituality to be found in the human being is based on the non-logical thinking. And this is the difference between the machine and the human being. My argument which said that the machine cannot have the problem of spirituality is based on it, and this is my interpretation. And moreover, I think that a human being is a thing that has history, but I do not think that the machine is the thing that has history. History, I mean something that when we look back in our life, we will remember that such thing has happened in our life, and something in our memory has so important for our life. This thing cannot be found in the machine.
Great, thank you.
So in your paper, you state that virtue typically comes from religion and philosophy. And then at the end of your paper, you make the argument that, especially when it comes to art, that you don't see AI being capable of having that subjective experience. So I think I know the answer to the question I'm going to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I think that what you're saying then is that you don't think that AI currently, nor by its very nature, would ever be capable of generating its own philosophy or religion or spirituality. Do I have you correct?
Yeah, I accept that my paper is based on the thought that come from philosophy and religion. I think religion might be the tool that we can use to look at the deepest, the deep of our mind. And I think when we try to study and compare between the machine and human being, I think religion is the most effective tool to distinguish between the different of the machine and human being.
Great, thank you. Chung-Hyung?
Yes, my question relates is about your concluding part of your paper, and you mentioned the artistic soul. And I'm not actually good at paintings or any arts or works of arts. So I just wonder, how can we know that certain works of art reveals an artistic soul, but others not? So how can you be so sure that human works of arts reveals an artistic soul, but AI can never do that? And I just wonder, what's the criteria of your judgments about that? And is it human intuition or something else? I just wonder your answer.
Yeah, when I talk about the artistic soul, I did not mean the metaphysical soul, but I mean something that the artist has accumulated in their life enough, and the thing express themselves through their work as the artist. As I mentioned earlier, human being has the history. Every artist has their history. And I think when I use AI to create my artwork, every time I put something and request from it to make for me, I think it's working seems not to be based on its history. I think AI cannot be the artist because there is no unique characteristic to be found in the AI, but human being has the history accumulated for a long time. And this is the thing I mean when I say about the artistic soul.
Okay, I thank you. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have a hard time maybe putting this question into words, but I'll try my best. So I was really interested in how you were arguing about utilitarian thinking perhaps being the only kind of thinking that would really align with AI in the way that it works. And in the concluding paragraph, you kind of summarize this as saying, well, there's maybe one virtue that AI is capable of, and it's this social virtue, because one of these features of utilitarianism is that it's supposed to use this kind of logical reasoning. It's supposed to take everyone's interests into account equally. And these seem like kind of pro-social virtues. And it seems like there's this maybe interesting problem then, because some of the examples you were using to illustrate this were thinking about like justice. What would happen in this kind of court case? Could AI be helpful here? It seems like it has the advantage of being able to do that really kind of complex calculations that would be maybe beyond human capacity, but within the capacity of AI. And maybe there's this tension between, like, because I think you're right, it seems on the face of it to support this kind of social value that we want. We want fair judgments and a justice system. And yet at the same time, it maybe loses one of the other things we care about, which is this kind of like sort of moral and political legitimacy of those decisions. If it's the case that we have AI making such complex calculations and we have the black box problem, so we can't understand and maybe like feel certain that it's done this correctly. And so in those cases, it just seems like a really odd tension there, where on the one hand, it does seem to take everyone's interests into account if it's working properly, and yet we lose the legitimacy side of it. And so maybe we're kind of back to the start where here's this potential avenue to develop AI, and yet unless we can figure out how to make those systems transparent, it still wouldn't actually live up to the expectations we want for it to have that kind of social virtue. So I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Oh yeah, I think among the ethical theory that we have studied from the West, the utilitarian virtue seem to be the only theory that think in terms of the quantity. Most of ethical theory talk about things in terms of quality, not quantity. And I think when we talk about the quantity, AI is the best thing to calculate, I think, in terms of the quantity. So in some complex situation, we might need the help of AI to look at the complicated situation without bias and calculate things in terms of quantity. And I think we can utilize this a very good aspect of AI.
DK.
Thank you so much for your paper and inspirational argument. And I would like to go back to what Jung has brought up. So you mentioned some artistic soul, and I might misunderstand your explanation and arguments. So if I'm wrong, please correct me. But you seem to certain phenomena are pretty much exclusive to only human. I mean, only human beings can do certain things, and seems to me artistic experience and expression are one of them. But I'm thinking of some evolutionary anthropologists such as Agustin Fuentes, and based on their researches, certain species such as macaque monkeys, they seem to experience some artistic aspects of our reality, and they seem to disclose certain artistic expression. So I don't know how you think of this kind of continuity between human species and other species. Even though these kind of research data show some continuity between the species, but you still want to highlight the discontinuity or etc. Just want to know your opinion about this.
Oh yeah, thank you. I talk about artistic soul as something that related to human being, but I accept that in some kind of animal, they would express a thing that we can call the beginning stage of artistic creation. But when I talk about art, I mean art in terms of the human understanding. I think in art there is some dimension of spirituality. For example, when we look at the painting of Van Gogh, I think in the painting of this artist, there is no only the subject of art, but we would see the subject of spirituality as well. And in the creation of the art to be found in the animal, I think I do not find the spirituality in the creation of the work of art. This is the difference between the creation of art by human being and animal.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Yeah, if I may have another go. Yeah, sort of an answer to my question and then the question about art. I hear you mention a few times the idea of having a history. I just wondered, what would it take for something to have a history? Because I'm thinking about AI chatbots, for example, where people can log in and keep having what feels like the same conversation over many months, even years. And they get a sense that they have a history, and the AI chatbot has this personality that develops and remembers preferences and the things they've talked about before. Is that getting towards having a history, or do you mean a much broader idea of history? Is there a sense in which AI takes on human history as it's trained on texts and things like that?
Yeah, when I talk about the history of human being, I mean the thing that have the meaning to our life. It could be possible that AI can have their own history, but the history of AI does not have the meaning to the AI itself. This is the difference between the history of human being and the history of the machine. History in human being is something that has the meaning to our life.
Yeah.
Wuxu Park.
Thank you for your presentation, for your talk. I just have a very minor question because the whole thing was a new thing for me. I just wanted to ask you about the Jain understanding of consciousness. Would this consciousness could be seen as a kind of animistic understanding of consciousness? Because you brought up 3 types of consciousness. You keep on talking about consciousness and the difference between AI and human consciousness, that AI couldn't have a sort of human consciousness. So I was just thinking about, you brought up Jain. So a Jain understanding of consciousness. So I just wanted to ask you to tell us more about Jain understanding of, and if it is like could be directly related to animistic understanding of consciousness.
Yeah, I think we can understand Jainism in terms of animistic thinking. But in the text of Jainism, I think we can find some argument that make them believe that there is the soul in everything. I think in the view of the Chinese people, they would think that AI can have the soul of its kind. But I am not sure that suppose we believe there are the soul in everything. What is the implication of this assertion to the consideration of the AI? That is why I have not clarified in the paper. I just mentioned it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because a phrase that keeps popping up in my head after your paper is that data is not history, and I think that for a Christian Western understanding of virtue, that I'm still formulating what I think that means for prudence, in the sense of prudence helps us understand what to do in a given situation, and data gives us more details about other situations, but does it give us the history and the perspective of people that have been in those situations? So I'm just sort of thinking out loud about how that might have implications for Western perspectives on virtue, particularly the virtue of prudence.
I have one comment on the historicity of AI or something like that. And I'm thinking of the AI is learning process, right? There is we may think of a history of data learning, and then can you apply the historical nature to AI as well? How do you respond to the question?
I think when we talk that AI is the learning process, I think learning is the thing that we will see in human being as well. Suppose we accept that there is a difference between the learning in human being and the learning in AI, which based on the difference between the way of thought to be found in these two things. I think AI learning is based on logical learning, but in human being, learning can be based on other things than logical learning, and this is the difference.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the third presentation in this set, and then after that we'll have a time for general question and answer and then a break. So our next presentation is by Rachel Siow Robertson, who is currently an assistant professor in philosophy of religion and philosophy at the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Hong Kong Baptist University. And their work focuses on how making and using technology impacts our character. So I think a lot of resonance there with a conference on AI and virtue. So Rachel, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, so the work that I'm sharing is actually coming out of a collaborative project that I'm doing. So I just wanted to mention my collaborators, Jennifer George, who works in computing at Goldsmiths, and Matthew Kuan Johnson, who was based in Oxford during the time that we were working on this, bringing his background in philosophy and cognitive science. And our starting point really for this paper was just an experience of some of the tensions and trade-offs that we felt and that others around us, and the reading that we were doing. We're all coming up as soon as we've started thinking about how AI shapes the way that we interact with each other in the world. So as users, there's this sort of many tensions that come up as we try to take hold of accessible, useful home technologies or apps on the one hand, at the same time as this extractive power that they seem to have, just taking data, surveillance, using that data to fuel further engagement. And one other thing that we were thinking about was we all struggle a lot with doom scrolling. So looking at ever updating news feeds that just seem tailored to trigger outrage and upset. And on the one hand, we felt like, oh, we should be thinking about these harmful comments and news and responding. On the other hand, it seems to have a cost to well-being. Then as educators as well, we were seeing this pull between demanding students, exams, performance from our students, whilst at the same time warning against shortcuts or ways of learning that used AI, like plagiarism or using ChatGPT is a big discussion. Or this sort of fitted into a general discussion where you get young people, students praised for unplugging and being more connected, but at the same time, in education itself, they seem to be subjected to ever higher levels of surveillance in their work process. So technologies that even track how they tap their keys, or where they are in the classroom when, and this whole discourse about being lacking AI skills and access being bad for their future. And then finally, in the area of technology, so AI ethics for technologists, we were seeing these promises and desire for responsible AI and that sort of thing, but at the same time, the actual processes being this sort of move fast and break things, or usually people, including tech workers themselves. So there's a hidden labor involved with data labelers or warehouse workers for Amazon. So in all of these cases and many more, there just seem to be these tensions for integrity. But at the same time, we were thinking about how integrity is really considered as a foundational virtue or meta virtue for moral agency, selfhood, maybe even flourishing itself. And so our question really was, what would it look like to safeguard integrity in interactions with AI in these specific contexts of being specific about it, but being really in depth about what integrity is. And so we get this quite complex picture of what integrity is, because there's a lot of literature on integrity, and we just wanted to find a way of integrating all of that, making it clear where the directions of integrity are. And we came up with this sort of threefold structure. The first being this self-to-world direction, so more of a cognitive contact with reality, discovering something about how the world is, or the moral commitments that you have. And there are ways AI supports that. So we were thinking about how search engines, translation tools, sort of videos that get promoted, or digital art, all of these things can be examples of how AI systems can support that kind of integrity. The other direction is will to self, so that's more like self-efficacy, so being able to change something in the world according to your desires, commitments, beliefs. And here again, we see many examples as we think about different types of AI systems: online activism leading to social change, assistive technology like gaze software, or even the work of technologists themselves. We often praise them for making new developments and being able to implement their AI systems. And then finally, there's this sort of overall kind of integrity, this achievement of overall unity. And again, we can think about mental health apps or other apps that help people make breakthroughs in this regard, or how a lot of people use social media and other platforms to form a sense of themselves, form their identities through movements like Me Too, make sense of their experiences, and so on. So positives, but at the same time, just reflecting those sort of tensions that I began the paper with. One thing that we began to explore was how in every case, there's something about the broader context of the development and the deployment of AI that introduces some severe constraints on integrity. So even though one thing that we wanted to recognize was that we didn't think people were entering into these spaces always wanting to do bad things or be bad people, but just the way that AI shaped their interactions ended up constraining being able to demonstrate or even exercise or form integrity. So there were many examples that we came up with in sort of self-to-world epistemic direction, the idea that I think a lot of people have mentioned already, the way that informational spaces are already shaped by previous data gathered on users, bad actors intentionally introducing comments and things like that, disproportionate data sets that don't really represent reality, already feeding what we get on our news feeds and the responses we get from chatbots, for example, things like nudging and forming filter bubbles, and even a kind of conflict within self-to-world integrity, where you might get a push to really defend the moral commitments you have to your own group at the cost of recognizing maybe what's going on outside your own group. So a lot of tensions there, I think. In the second kind of integrity as well, there's issues that impede our self-efficacy, things like virtual stereotyping, where, for example, if you're a gambler and you've used these sort of websites before, you might want to stop, but ads and things will just keep popping up, recommendations based on your data, and that data will also be used to influence similarly vulnerable people. And an interesting one is sort of ease of access that AI systems seem to represent. They have this apparent authority, this conciseness that might actually misrepresent what it takes to fulfill a moral commitment or to acquire knowledge. And these are sort of reinforced. I think there's a lot of interaction between the different levels of integrity. where if you have an epistemic barrier and you don't know the virtual stereotypes assigned to you, for example, you might be further nudged into communities which impede your formation and ability to change or make a change. And finally, all of that represents tensions on the overall kind of integrity as well, where you might end up having your values shift to what you didn't originally start off with, or have these kind of conflicts between the forms of integrity, where you get that sort of doom scrolling, where you're trying to fulfill your epistemic commitments at a cost to your self-efficacy, for example, or maybe you have to give false information so that you don't end up getting virtually stereotyped. So a lot of tensions there. I did want to note that we also, a lot of this was focused on the effect on users, but tech leaders as well. They are users too, so face these constraints. But in particular, we do note that they really have this failure of the self-to-world direction in particular, where they fail to recognize the cost of their technologies, especially those in leadership, more in positions of power within tech companies, as the technologies they develop continue to extract data, labor, and resources, and they don't really count that cost. So what's the lesson of this sort of complex picture of integrity? I think one thing that we wanted to note was just how interconnected virtue is. So the case of integrity really brings out how what individuals do really impacts on others' formation and well-being. And AI systems really encode that. They really are a concrete case where taking data, labor, and these sorts of things on the one hand really impact on other people in the community, in the global community as well. And this kind of means that the benefits and costs of maintaining virtue aren't all or nothing and aren't borne equally as well. So we were thinking about how to overcome some of those constraints, users might need a great deal of time and money to access higher quality information and communities, to be able to escape value capture in their places of education or work. They might not have a choice about which AI systems they are operating under and which values they are given to sort of chase after. And of course, tech companies are really incentivized to uphold constraints, because promoting these kind of tensions and integrity really work to keep people working and engaging in ways that benefit tech companies, despite ongoing costs. So I guess the lesson that we wanted to bring out was that this idea that there are constraints on the formation and exercise of virtue really needs to inform recommendations about which virtues or principles or rules are needed when we approach AI. So just telling people that they should be more honest or diligent, it might not be appropriate, because there may not be a reward of truth or safety for them, depending on their place within this sort of tech AI ecosystem. And so there are two directions that we kind of entered in, one being implications for design and deployment of AI, so those people working at that level within tech companies. We've been thinking a bit about how to prioritize quality rather than quantity in UX frameworks. So that's really getting specific about how do UX researchers test and evaluate how well products are doing and different stages in product development. And so there we've been trying to think about ways of measuring and testing cognitive and moral aspects of user experience. And then a more broader approach that we were trying to apply to education was this idea that we need a more interpersonal community approach to AI ethics. And I guess that applies in the design area, where we were trying to argue that even technologists and designers, really at the beginning of the design process, they need to be in the right kind of relationships to those who are usually left out, taken advantage of, misrepresented through approaches to AI. So really do the hard work of engaging with genuine stakeholders in their products, but also in education. So I ended the paper with some thoughts on what would it look like as educators to have that kind of interpersonal approach as well, in response to the recognition that integrity and probably other virtues as well really are worked out in a community and within structures that we place on each other. So that's the shape of my paper. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Susan.
Yeah, so I like thoroughly enjoyed this paper. I think that there's like a really rich discussion here, and like how encompassing the framework is with integrity, being able to tie in together what seem like maybe disparate cases of AI, but then they all actually fit in really nicely once you have integrity as this unifying framework for everything. So I thought that was awesome. And then there was one point in the paper that got me thinking, because for a lot of it, you do focus on the users. And then there's this one point where you focus on the technologists themselves. Like, yes, they're users, but look, there's also this unique kind of integrity concerns here for them in virtue of this role they have as the developers. And that got me thinking about, and I suppose this is maybe like the next paper you could write after this one, because I think it would be too much to add into like the way the paper is currently. But then also like applying this integrity framework to non-users, because right, when you have this kind of STS idea of like technology being structural, even for non-users. So say like someone decides they don't want to own and drive a car because of sustainability concerns, and they can make that personal choice and they maybe accomplish something, but at the same time it doesn't change the broader fact that society's kind of bought into cars. Like, we have roads as part of our infrastructure and gas stations, and we're kind of getting, I think, to that point with AI, right? Like, it's becoming this kind of social structure. And so it'd be really cool then to look at like maybe what kinds of unique integrity tensions come up for even non-users of AI, like people who opt out or just people who kind of are maybe more indirect stakeholders. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up. Some of the work that I was looking at when I was looking at integrity was to do with notions of protest and refusal and things like that. And I think that fits really well with that idea that even opting out comes at a cost and also requires, well, in some ways, those are the real cases of integrity where you're trying to preserve individual integrity at a great cost to yourself, because you're not taking up the conveniences of it, but also you bring yourself into conflict with existing structures and powers. So I was thinking, I think it was just yesterday, I was reading about in, I think, Venezuela, where Google is trying to build data centers in the middle of a drought, and those people, they're not the users of the data center, but they are going to be impacted hugely by it. And I think those kind of cases really, need to be more central to these discussions. And I think that the framework maybe can be applied in two ways. So one, just highlighting that there is this extra cost. It's not just the users, as you say, it's also because it's so all-encompassing, and the infrastructure that's needed to support AI is physical and intrusive, takes up resources, it affects non-users as well. And then secondly, to make sure that we respect the kind of integrity it takes to opt out of those systems as well, and how kind of anger and protest and being seen as being in the way of technological progress and things like that need to be respected as forms of integrity as well. So those are two thoughts that I have. Yeah, thanks.
My question is on the one just concept that you mentioned in page 9, and that is burdened virtues. Yeah, and you just mentioned it only once, and seems to be, well, that part I didn't really get what you were talking about, actually. Could you explain a little bit further about the burdened virtue?
Yeah, for sure. So this actually connects with Susan's question really nicely. So the burden virtues come from work by Lisa Tessman, writing more broadly about virtue. I guess it has a similar starting point to where I started, which is the idea that the traditional view of virtue, there's a kind of coupling between being able to develop and exercise virtue and well-being. So the idea is that if you are able to gain these virtues, you'll be able to be on your way to flourishing. the idea of the burden virtues is that because of structural conditions, certain structural conditions in the world, that coupling doesn't always happen. So a good example would be thinking about people who are maybe protesting against some injustice, where, for example, yeah, if you stand out there and you picket the space where Google is trying to build their data center, you are exercising virtue, but the kind of anger that it brings, the opposition that you will face, maybe even being ostracized from your own community, these kind of things all mean that you won't be able to actually see the benefits for yourself, perhaps never, because you might not even win in these cases. So that was the general idea behind the burden virtues, where you might be tempted to criticize people who are in those sort of situations because they seem angry, they seem downtrodden, they seem to not be flourishing. But Lisa Tessman argues that there are praiseworthy traits that come about in these situations that don't look like the traditional virtues. They're not coupled with well-being in this life, at least, but they are still good to recommend and maybe even more appropriate. And so what I was trying to do, this is not in this paper, it's in some other work that I've done, is think about what would the burden virtues, because Lisa Tessman's work is very general, it's not applied to this specific context. What would those look like when it comes to AI? And I think notions like refusal to be involved, dishonesty as well is a big one that I've thought about, how people with protected characteristics, it's a virtue for them to not tell the truth, even at cost to their own commitments, even bringing a kind of tension to their own integrity as well, to remain hidden in some areas of their life. It's still a virtue. So things like that don't look like virtues come at a cost, but they are in the sort of long-term overall process of pursuing well-being for society as a whole. So that's the sort of idea there.
Thank you. And I mean, your suggestion is kind of promoting the burdened virtue, or in your words, mitigate some of this with reality?
Yeah, I think both. So it depends on your place, I think, within the tech ecosystem. So the burden virtues are at once a criticism, because they're saying, look, this is an extra harm that is being done to people by AI systems that's not usually recognized. Because I think sometimes we can be quick to criticize people, maybe in filter bubbles. Often people look down on people who get into extremist positions. And of course, there's things to criticize, but I think it comes out of a place of realizing that actually these sort of characterological harms done are an extra harm on top of all the other things done by AI to people. And the anger and the frustration and all of that is a harm done. And so if your AI systems are producing angry, frustrated people who always feel like they need to lie, they need to get around the systems, be subversive, then that's something that is a problem with AI. But on the other side, if you are a user, especially if you don't have much power within the structures, maybe as a student or as a really paid tech worker, or just somebody who's living in a place with a drought and you're not even a user, I think it would be something to recommend. And that's pushing. So if the first part is pushing against some of the pessimism about people saying, oh, they shouldn't be like this, the second part is sort of pushing against the optimism of some virtue theorists, especially in the area of technology, where they just give a list of virtues and they say, just encode this into AI, just develop it in your character teaching and things will be good. But I think we need to be more realistic when we talk with our students, and when we think about character education, we might need to be more subtle and just I'm not saying that we teach children to lie, but maybe we do need to teach them that honesty might require different things of them in different situations, that there's, because of the dangers of when they're using AI systems, when you want to excel in the education system, in some sense you need to play the game, but it doesn't mean that you need to buy into the values. So all of these kind of more subversive techniques, I suppose. It's a recommendation as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing the issue of integrity to our discussion table. And I just, my question is very brief, and I just want to know, listen more about your own personal experience when using AI. I think you have experienced some anger and frustration as well. And so can you share some of your experiences of struggling for your own integrity using AI? Something like protesting, opting out, or refusing, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the two areas I mentioned are the ones that I've been struggling mostly. So personally, as a user, having to use a lot of technologies which have AI capabilities. So they're already built in with data collection and analysis and internet connectivity and all of these things. I just don't use it, even though it's really frustrating sometimes to have these kind of products. I just don't use it. The doom scrolling, I don't know. This is an ongoing thing. I do just feel, on the one hand, I should know about things and should respond to things, but on the other hand, it weighs you down. So that one's ongoing. Education, I think, is maybe the bigger area where maybe I won't say too much about what I do and don't do, but I just have a lot of sympathy with my students, and I think there is just this push to get them into AI metrics and using AI, and it's confusing for them and it's difficult for them. And so I guess, yeah, I want to equip them, but I try to have these kind of conversations with them as well, where, you know, you just recognize it is difficult and that there are these pressures on them, and I might be generous and look away if they don't, or not use some of these educational technologies. That's not how I'm measuring them. We might have to do it, but that's not how I'm going to assess them. So there's a way of just having that conversation where you say, look, I know these are the structures that are in place. That's not where this course is trying to push you, or that's not the values that we're trying to reach towards. So there's going to be a part where we have to do it, and then there's going to be a part where we're really going to do the main learning and teaching. So that might be another area.
Okay, thank you for sharing your experiences.
If anyone else has other ideas, I'd love to hear them as well, especially in education.
So this is a separate point, maybe, so not on the education. But I guess I wanted to hear more about the framework that you're working on, about UX experience, and then trying to come up with some questions that maybe get us beyond just thinking about that kind of superficial engagement, or maybe even like problematic forms of engagement, and trying to see like, well, no, is this actually supporting or removing some of those tensions in terms of integrity for users? So I know you said in the paper that you're sort of in the process of piloting the framework, but yeah, I just want to hear more about that. Like, how did you come up with this framework? Maybe more about the motivations behind it and what the current status is of that.
Yeah, so what we did was quite specific. So there's an existing framework that Google, so researchers at Google developed and use quite widely for their products. And it's an acronym that spells out HEART. So it's a quite short survey that is meant to measure engagement. so user experience engagement. And so what we did was we looked at that survey, and then off the back of that, we developed some questions that we thought filled in the gaps of the HEART framework. It really just measures how often and for how long the user is using it. It asks quite narrow questions about whether they're satisfied with the features of that product. And so it's really just focused on quantity. So that's the first thing that we started with. We just looked at the questions people are actually using to assess a lot of products, and just saw that they're very quantity focused. It's just how much, how often, how long. And then off the back of that, we developed an expanded survey. So we kept those questions in, but we had 5 other categories that we introduced beyond just happiness, engagement, those kind of things that Google was looking at. One of them being the integrity question that was in the paper. I'm not very happy with that. That's partly why I want to do more work on integrity. But other questions were trying to introduce a more a deeper look at what the users' motivations were, and especially over time, how they felt like, how they approached the product at the beginning, and whether it was fulfilling what they actually wanted by the end. Because one thing about just testing in that moment, how long and how often and things like that, it's very surface level, and people were saying, yeah, the like button works for me, or something like that. But when you ask more about these kind of questions about motivation and integrity and things like that, we were getting responses that were a lot deeper about actually, yeah, the function is fine, but actually we didn't want that function in the first place, and things like that. So yeah, we have an initial conference paper that I can send to you, which shows all the questions that we used in some specific situations. It's not all AI related technology, but just trying to get a sort of long-term dimension and delving into user motivation and what their values were. And already it's quite preliminary, but we did see in each case that we were using these to test products. It was giving a much more nuanced picture of there might be high engagement on the HEART metrics, but people are really dissatisfied. There's this gap. Interestingly, and maybe not so good, is that there might be really high satisfaction, but really low engagement, because people felt happier when they weren't pushed into using it all the time. So I don't know. That was a bit of a problem for tech companies, I think. I don't know really what the solution there is. And then the other thing we were doing was looking at the design process itself. So looking at some frameworks which break down the design process right from the initial contact with the client to putting the product out. And we were just trying to tweak those frameworks by saying actually engagement with stakeholders needs to happen throughout the process, and also broadening the view of what stakeholders are, because often the client is not the user. So we were trying to think about how to encode these broader like community consultations and things like that earlier in the process and then throughout. So rather than making contact with the client, going away, developing the product, testing it on a group of users according to the client's demands, and then getting it out. What would it look like to involve the people who really are impacted throughout the process as well? So that's another side. That's quite early though. Yeah.
What was the product that you surveyed?
There were quite a few different ones. So there was one that we did was looking at Facebook, and then an experimental social media platform that hasn't really been widely released yet, but was designed as in opposition to Facebook. So it didn't have a lot of the features like the like button or commenting, or so it tried to remove a lot of these features. So we were talking, yeah, sending out surveys to users and hearing about their reflections on those different functions. We worked with a student who was designing a fitness app as well. So we gave the framework to them at the beginning of the design process, and they did some really interesting work on the kind of functions that they thought would target more of a sustainable, healthy long-term use rather than the kind of really intense initial engagement and drop-off that often happens with fitness apps. Those were the AI related ones. There were a couple other cases that were not AI related. We were looking at empathy and virtual reality as well. What did it look like to have a deep engagement rather than exploiting that kind of situation? So yeah, lots of different cases. It was very interesting how, yeah, just having this view of how do you support integrity, have deeper engagement. Actually, a lot of the students we worked with who were doing design and development found a really fruitful starting point to think about what functions, what could they build in to the products from the start.
Great. We're in the general discussion now, so we can continue along this vein, or we can go back to things that we've touched upon. Okay. I might try and put Susan on the spot as well, and don't feel like you have to answer it. But I think in light of the conversations we've had with Virtue, I'm just curious if you think that there's anything we could pick up from a Virtue framework that might inform the position or the argument you're trying to structure along recommender systems and their use or misuse or abuse.
Yeah, so that's one thing I'm still thinking about, especially with Shannon Valor's work about moral de-skilling, because maybe there's something there in the way that I feel worried about how recommender systems and AI maybe kind of does too much for us or imposes certain options or spaces of possibilities, just kind of fundamentally alters what we're deciding between or what kinds of decisions we have to make. And then thinking, does that ultimately harm us when it takes away these opportunities to practice, right? Because if you're really thinking about virtue as this thing that you have to cultivate, it's this activity, it's this thing that you need opportunities to continue to kind of hone in, like, and it maybe seems more like harder to make that connection when you're thinking about something just like recommendations, like making decisions about like which restaurant to eat at or which song to add to a playlist, right? Like that's not as much of a high stakes example, but I think I see this more of an issue with some of like, as some of these other papers are talking about AI that has much higher stakes, right? And that might be the more kind of critical perspective where like sometimes we're thinking about AI and being able to possess virtue or help people develop virtue. Like when we were thinking of the AI monk chatbot example, right? Like there's something beneficial in having a good example to follow as part of cultivating and learning, that kind of moral framework or on the way and path to develop virtue. But at the same time, I worry that is there maybe there's an extent to which AI can help, and then beyond that, it becomes harmful. And it instead of actually promoting us or helping us gain virtue, like if we rely on it too heavily, all of a sudden it now has the opposite effect. And in some way, I think maybe that matches like maybe a common sense intuition that other people have. Like, yes, it's a nice tool, right? Like sometimes, some of the more positive accounts take a more limited role on what we think AI should be doing. Sorry, this is a very rambling response to the question you asked, but as you can tell, I've been trying to make sense of this and think about it more. But yeah, I am trying to think, is it really a more limited role that we are envisioning for AI as being helpful? And I guess I just find it interesting, given maybe the more like public discourse that I hear about it, where it seems much more polarized. Like there's people who are very like anti-AI or very like AI hype, like it's taking over, it's going to be super intelligent, it's going to solve all of our problems for us. And then when we have these discussions, it seems like people are trying to have a much more nuanced discussion and really trying to find the boundaries of where we think AI is helpful and at what point it stops being helpful, and maybe moral de-skilling in that process and how it relates to virtue is where it stops being as helpful.
Yeah, Hope and Kim.
Thank you, everybody. It was great presentations. I may raise a question to three the three speakers this morning. Maybe I think the virtues, understanding of virtues are very culturally dependent. But unfortunately, the predominant definition and understanding of virtue is still very Western. So let me ask first the Chang and Sohn, why you choose human virtue as a Korean American, I guess, and so you have some problem with Confucian ethics because your father is so too stubborn and Confucian. So maybe I don't know, but let me hear why you still you criticize Hume, or you will use Hume as a kind of grand discourse for virtue ethics. That's my first question. The second one is to Rachel. Very good, excellent. It is very problematic, and I learned a lot from you. But still, integrity is also very culturally dependent. We have a lot of imperialism by the way of the rationale of integrity. So how you can accommodate in your research the diversity of understanding, culturally diverse understanding of integrity. So how can you accommodate that? Maybe the last, Professor Promta, you suggest very interesting distinction between AI and human in terms of history. Jung is saying kind of very clever way of saying history of data. Anyway, my question is, how can you deal with, we have to set up kind of virtue, you know, for AI, then how you can accommodate non-Buddhist virtue and understanding or application. That's my, I don't know if it makes sense, but okay. Mr. Sohn first, please.
Yeah, so my answer. Okay, first of all, I'm not Korean American. I was born and raised in Korean, and then I learned English 8 years ago, so my English is not that perfect. Yeah, I'm a ramble so much, so I apologize for some of the issues that during the presentation. But I was grown and know about the Confucian ethics, and that I love those things as a my legacy. But still, the reason why I use Hume, first of all, Hume seems to be a hipster figure for me, honestly. So usually the virtue ethics from the Western perspective are predominantly by Aristotle. So, but Hume's voice isn't really less, but it's really important, especially amongst the neuroscientists, because Hume talks about the sentiment is really crucial in morality. And then that idea actually resonates in the neuroscience findings. Like in the predominantly philosophy, like traditional philosophy talks about the reason as the basis of emotion, the morality and the virtue, and science trumps that the idea that the emotion is really crucial, because the emotional processing area, when you have a lesion or damage in your brain, you're unable to make a moral decision making at all. You're making really antisocial, community decision making. So that's why that makes me to focus on Hume's idea. But still, I really appreciate the Confucian virtue ethics in general. So it will be really great if I do some neuroscience research and incorporate some of the Confucian virtue ethics, then that'll be great. So
great. I'm looking forward to your research, and I think you are the one who have to recover our important legacy, but very forgotten by the world. So I'm asking you to be a warrior to do that.
Warrior, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. I guess, yeah, I guess on a personal level, I don't know non-Western philosophy very well, and so part of being here and being back in Hong Kong, I'm really here to learn. So I'm really open to hearing more and to learning about that. And I think it's so important as well for approaches to AI ethics, but I guess also personally. So I'm half Chinese, half white Australian. So yeah, maybe it's seeking after my own integrity, this quest as well. So that's just to say I need to learn. The second thing I think, partly why I was drawn to integrity was I was thinking, on the one hand, I hope that the framework can be quite neutral. So what is it to have those three forms of integrity? Which are more important? What do they look like? I hope can all be informed by non-Western perspectives and should be. And then secondly, this idea of the more communal view of what it is to be virtuous. I feel like that's amenable to non-Western perspectives and perhaps, yeah, even demands it, because I feel like AI ethics is often still quite individualistic, doesn't always take into account the broader ways that we fit in with each other and in the natural world. So yeah, I hope there's some promise of being able to learn and to bring in those perspectives as well.
So your understanding of integration is now British or British Chinese?
I don't know. It's definitely Western, yes, but I hope I have space to grow. Yeah.
So global. You say global. You should be global, right?
It should be, but I don't think it is at the moment. Not yet.
Yeah. Okay, Professor Promta.
Yeah, I think writing a paper is based on our choice, and I think our choice is based on our personality. I think my background is Buddhism, and exactly I study Western philosophy, but I do not think that my deep background is Western philosophy. So when I choose to write a paper, I think I should write from my deep background, but I need to know the perspective from other perspective. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. And I think one of the reasons why we chose virtue as sort of a topic to have the discussion about AI about was because it gave us something that was specific, but also diverse in the sense of there are lots of ways in which we can think about virtue and we can learn from one another, but it also gives us a place to sort of dig down into tradition and sort of say that there are things that we can offer each other in the discussion of AI that come from a particular belief or a particular cultural understanding or practice. So I've been very excited about the diverse views of virtue that we've had, and I think it's going to take a long time to unpack and to think about how that affects. But I'm already starting to see some places of consonance, but also dissonance in the different approaches, and I think there's a lot of fruitful work to be done.
I appreciate your project. Thank you for that.
And I think some of the other approaches that we might hear about virtue. So in the Berkeley conference, we had some McIntyre specific sort of secular virtue. We did have a Muslim voice. I think we're going to have a couple of Muslim perspectives in the Rome conference as well. So each conference sort of has its own mix of things. So it's been really interesting. So I would encourage you also, if you're interested, to check out some of the other papers if you haven't had a chance to, or we can be in touch about the work that others are doing, because I do think that there is a lot of interesting intersection between the work that the 60 or so scholars that are involved in the conferences are doing. Chang, I'm wondering if did you see the question in the chat? Do you have just curious if you have a response or not?
Yes. So I really liked your example, like the difference, like specify the difference between like two musicians play, like improvise together versus one musician plays based on the recorded beat. Yeah, that's actually the really good example of what I may talk about, the one like sided stimulus to brain coupling and brain to brain coupling. We agree that there's a qualitative difference between the human neural coupling versus AI to human coupling, like that. I understand Hume sympathy as quite conservative position, because even in the between humans, like if there's no like recognition of the mutual context or the common ground, there's no sympathy happens, and then it is supported by the neural coupling. So if there's a dissonance, for instance, like when we meet in the street and then you raise a hand to say hello, and then I receive that gesture as the like threatening or something like that, there's no like neural coupling or the sympathy at all. So it has to be context based and then emotional based on the like commonality. So that's really strict. There's a qualitative difference between the AI and the human process of sympathy.
Can I ask some questions?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I think this is I bring this question to all of you, and in our discussions there are some emphasis or highlighting the distinction between human virtue and AI virtue. And my question is, what's the point of distinguishing human virtue from AI, or highlighting the distinctions between the two? And I understand when someone focuses on human virtue in interaction with AI, or AI virtues in the design and development of AI, but why we need a distinction between the two? And is there anyone who can explain and answer this question?
I think the reason behind our distinction between human virtue and AI virtue is that I think there is some understanding among people in the world who imagine that some days in the future it could be possible that AI can have the virtue same as the one that we human beings have. I think even in the circle of those who are the maker of AI, I think this understanding can be found. So it might be the good thing to try to understand the difference between these two systems of virtue. I think this is the reason behind our attempt to distinguish between these two things.
Yeah, I think I would agree that I hear like quite a few views where there's actually some optimism, like acknowledging that currently the way AI functions, it's not enough to have the equivalent of like a human like virtue, while still leaving open the possibility that given how it might develop in the future, it's possible that it could acquire something. Because part of me was like, well, is it maybe just a kind of anthropocentrism at work where we're thinking there's something special and unique about humans? And maybe there's a little bit of that going on, but also just a kind of realism about acknowledging the sort of differences in capacities and functions of humans and AI, at least currently. But then I think people will diverge about where they see that going in the future, where some people will have a more view just like, and I don't think AI will ever be able to acquire something like human virtue. It'll only ever acquire AI virtue, and maybe it'll do that better and more reliably, but never the same kind as humans, versus those who will actually say, well, no, I think once it advances beyond the current capacities, it'll have the exact kind of virtues that humans have. But yeah, I guess maybe people are trying to, acknowledge where they see limitations in AI, at least presently.
So one of the major key point in this question might be the giving the agency or the responsibility, because human virtues are oriented based on the human responsibility and agency, and then AI doesn't. So like in the near future, like the many sci-fi movies, as discussed in many sci-fi movies, if the AI have a same equivalent status, then there should be no boundaries between the humans and AI ethics. But still, like unless we give the same responsibility or treat the AI as the exactly same moral agency, there should be a difference between those two.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very tough question, because I see it resonating with the points that you brought up in your paper, and that a lot of what we're doing, I think, is trying to draw distinctions based on capabilities, functions, and that, to put it in Christian language, is sort of a substantive approach to Imago Dei, sort of a, this is what it means to be able to think like a human, or to be like a human. And as Levi pointed out, that is also problematic, because we don't always treat all humans as if they're part of that community. And so we like to classify things, but there are problems with those classifications. And I think that even the discussion of multiple understandings of virtue within the human species itself only extends to when we're going to be talking about other organisms as well. And that I would not be surprised if AI now or in the future would have its own understanding of virtue that would be distinct from human virtue, if we, even within human religions and cultures, we already have a diversity, a variety of virtue perspectives.
Referring the Chang presentation, you mentioned, I think because I can hear well, but you made some kind of distinction between human-like intelligence and AGI. I think you have to clarify further, because artificial general intelligence and human-like intelligence. What is human-like intelligence? You are saying ANI, artificial narrow intelligence, or they call soft intelligence, soft AI, but I think there is something you are thinking there, but I think you have to clarify for further. And also, Jung Young's question: what is the distinction between you say ethic and human ethics? Well, it is confusing question. Actually, there is no fixed human ethics and AI ethics. Culturally dependent ethic, human virtue is always on the progress. Even Confucianism, I don't think there is any fixed virtues, but it is depend on the context and history. So particularly for the sake of AI, I think the AI ethics and AI virtue is still on the progress, still depend on our designers, engineers, and humanity. So that's the point I really emphasize on. We have still gold time. We are in gold time. If the AI has super intelligence, as Nick Bostrom or those guys, transhumanist guy, are saying, we no longer have any capacity to deal with the development of AI. So I think now is the time, still the time, how we have to define AI ethics, or how we can recommend AI kind of ethics, which can have a kind of good relationship with humanity. So the definition of human ethic and human virtue, or definitions of AI ethic and AI virtue, are in progress for discussion. So sometimes I hear there's kind of condition saying there is kind of a fixed one already. So this kind of discussion is very important. So even though we do not agree, but we try to progress to kind of have kind of guideline to deal with this kind of complex problem between AI and humanity. But the thing is, I still think we still have time, but that time they kind of singularity is near kind of thing, but I don't know what happened, but still there is possibility. So we have to prepare. So that's why this conference is very important.
So yeah, thank you so much for your question. So yeah, definition problem between the computer science versus the neuroscience position, because the computer science people say like a large language model is enough for AGI. And the neuroscience people, including myself, talks about the AGI is supposed to be an interactive AI within the human. So it must be study the human. So that's why like neuroscientists are focusing more on the human-like AI compared to the computer science people talk about the larger language model and as a AGI in general. So for me, like from the neuroscientific perspective, the neuroscience holds the physicalist basis. So we focus on the human, the cognition. So we call it like neuroepistemology as a basis of neuroontology. So in that spectrum of the structure, it is inevitable to talk about the human. That reason why I'm talking about the AGI as more of a human-like thing compared to the larger language model.
I think the considering AI in terms of ethics and virtues, with reference to ChatGPT is problematic. ChatGPT is not completed tool. It has a lot of problems, particularly hallucination. You cannot trust. You cannot write paper with believe ChatGPT. You will have a big problem with that. So ChatGPT is actually still not big thing. So I think what we are doing is right now is beyond that, particularly coming super intelligence. They say AGI, whatever they say. And also my real worry is coming transhumanism, how we can deal with transhumanism and the end of what they call end of Homo sapiens, how we theologians, ethicists, and other scholars can prepare the possibility of that. You may say, yes, you will open for that, but still we have to some kind of solid, robust debate to prepare it. But I think we don't have enough preparation so far. So I think your clarification between neuroscientist definition of human-like, that is very interesting. So I think that discussion helpful, but let me ask it, is too premature. Then how should neuroscientists say possibility of transhumanism?
We're not in the transhumanism debate yet, because we're like in neuroscience is really in an infant level to talk about the we don't know what this conscious means, so it's hard to talk about the transhumanism yet. But still, what we are focusing on is the larger language model isn't enough, so we're integrating larger language model as a software with the hardware, which talks about the cognition or the embodiment. We call it neuro AI. I'm posting the article that my PI this paper, we talk about the new way of Turing test. So like large language model passed the Turing test almost, but we need how the LLM with the embodied, like the machine can interact just like the like a biological component. That's what we are focusing on. So we're focusing on this one rather than the transhumanism debate. So we're not there yet. So
I think that's probably a good place to pause for now. We need to take our break. So let's try and come back in let's say 14 minutes. We'll end up being a couple minutes behind, but I think it's good to be able to step away and take a break. I do want to acknowledge Brian's comments in the question and answer box as well, and yeah, I would agree in that these kinds of conversations happen, and that yeah, monoliths are not, cultures and perspectives are not necessarily always monolithic or don't bleed into one another. So yeah, I think these continue to be important discussions.